Hi there, students. Okay, this video is about the adjective heavy and the adverb heavily. I'm going to give you collocations and sentences with these words. It's often difficult to know whether to use heavily, strongly, deeply, highly, and I can see no rules, so the only way is to give you the collocations I can think of that go with this, okay? So let's see. London is heavily populated, okay? Yeah, I wouldn't say a heavy population, it's heavily populated, yeah? The patient was heavily sedated, okay? Heavy sedation, yeah? So lots of drugs to keep him asleep. You bear a heavy responsibility. You carry a heavy responsibility. A judge could give a criminal a heavy sentence, yeah? Or just maybe a heavy fine. You could be fined heavily, yeah? He was fined heavily for parking on a double yellow line, yeah? You would be heavily punished as well, a heavy punishment, yeah? While we're at it, I'm thinking an HGV, a heavy goods vehicle, big lorry, yeah? Okay, you could have a heavy perfume, very strong smelling, smells everywhere. And then obviously heavy rain, heavy snow, it rained heavily, it sleeted heavily, yeah? You could have heavy pollution. London is heavily polluted, yeah? Okay, there is heavy pollution in this river. Heavy duty is one I like. Something that's heavy duty lasts a long time. You can use it a lot and it doesn't wear out, it doesn't break or finish easily, yeah? A heavy duty battery will give you a strong current at a good voltage for a long period of time. And then of course heavy metal, the music, brum, brum. Okay. You could be heavily indebted to somebody. Notice together, indebted. I'm heavily indebted to you. But I'm also heavily in debt to you. Indebted, it could be money, but more normally it's for a favour. The favour you did me last week leaves me heavily indebted to you, yeah? Okay, he's heavily in debt to the bank, okay? A heavy debt. I'm sure you work a lot of hours. I'm sure you have a heavy schedule, okay? A lot in your schedule, no spare time. Somebody who smokes a lot could be called a heavy smoker. And heavy lifting is when you have to lift and carry heavy boxes, yeah? It's not a good idea to do heavy lifting if you're not feeling well. You could say there was a really heavy atmosphere in the room, a very strong or angry or strange atmosphere. Okay, a burden, something you carry, so a heavy burden or a heavy load. You could be heavily burdened or heavily loaded. Yeah, and there are heavy taxes on this. It's heavily taxed. Otherwise, there are also heavy restrictions on its sale. A prisoner could have heavy chains. I guess he's chained heavily. And if somebody's really sarcastic, they could use heavy sarcasm. Okay, you could be heavily weighed down with the shopping. I went to the supermarket and walked back heavily weighed down. If you're a soldier, you could be under heavy fire. A lot of people shooting at you, yeah? The soldiers were under heavy fire. And finally, if you make heavy weather of something, you find it very difficult to progress, yeah? It's not easy for you, okay, to make heavy weather of something, to find it very difficult, probably because you're not doing it right, okay? So heavy, yeah? It doesn't just talk about weight, it talks about a lot of things, yeah? So, Let's just go through them again. Heavily populated, heavily sedated, a heavy responsibility, a heavy jail sentence, a heavy goods vehicle, a heavy fine or a heavy punishment, heavy perfume. Okay, it snowed heavily, it rained heavily, it sleeted heavily. London is heavily polluted. A heavy duty battery, heavy metal music, yeah? Heavily in debt, heavily indebted. To have a heavy schedule, to be a heavy smoker, to do some heavy lifting, a heavy atmosphere, heavily burdened, heavily loaded, heavy taxes, heavy restrictions, heavy sarcasm, heavily weighed down, under heavy fire, and to make heavy weather of something. Okay, you've got a ton of collocations there with heavy, yeah, so I'm sure you're going to remember some of them. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now. English collocations with heavy and heavily.